The film begins by showing that in ancient India, a group of sages meditated in the Himalayas for many years until they were finally blessed with the energy of Brahmashakti, which produced many celestial weapons of power called astras. Each astra had various natural powers ranging from elemental forces to those of animals and plants. Among the astras, the most powerful one in the world was called brahmastra, which had the capacity to destroy the world and everything in it with a single strike. The emergence of brahmastra caused the sages to unite to stop the chaos that resulted from brahmastra's power. Fortunately, the sages managed to imprison brahmastra inside a volcano, restoring peace to the world. As time went by, brahmastra secretly reappeared in society, and those who inherited its power across generations began causing chaos in various parts of the world using brahmastra's evil force. In the present day, a young man in Mumbai named Shiva, who works as a disc jockey, visits a temple to participate in the Durga Puja festival. During the festival, Shiva notices a beautiful girl named Isha Chatterjee who is also attending the festival. At that moment, Shiva is captivated by Isha, but he doesn't have the chance to approach her for an introduction because he needs to get ready to perform as a DJ at a nightclub. That night, Shiva does his job by playing music for the clubgoers. During his performance, he spots Isha again, enjoying the music with her friends. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Shiva quickly follows Isha to catch up with her and sees them entering an open elevator. Without hesitation, Shiva also gets into the elevator to introduce himself to Isha, where Isha warmly welcomes him after seeing his efforts. Shortly thereafter, Shiva invites Isha and her friends to a simple birthday party at an orphanage, which he had arranged for one of the orphanage's residents. Apparently, Shiva's genuine care for the children at the orphanage appears to deeply touch Isha. After the party ended, Shiva told Isha that he never knew his father, and his mother died in a fire when he was only 8 months old. He then took Isha to his room to show her a large conch shell, a gift from his mother that he has kept well as a memento. Switching to the city of Delhi, a scientist and member of the Brahmansh named Mohan was suddenly attacked by 2 criminals, Zor and Raftar, who came to seize a piece of the brahmastra that he had kept for years. After overpowering Mohan, Zor and Raftar started to search the place, while Mohan pretended to be helpless and secretly activated his Vanarastra, a powerful artifact with the strength of a giant monkey. With this power, Mohan attacked the 2 criminals and then leapt high into the sky. Once the situation seemed safe, Mohan returned to his apartment to retrieve the piece of the brahmastra that he had disguised as a telescope. Using a drop of his blood, the telescope transformed into a box containing the brahmastra fragment sought by Zor and Raftar. At the same time, Junoon, the leader of Zor and Raftar, arrived and attacked Mohan until he was immobilized. She then took the brahmastra fragment and the Vanarastra bracelet that Mohan wore on his leg. Additionally, Junoon deliberately entered Mohan's mind to find out the holder of the other brahmastra fragments. Eventually, Junoon learned that the second fragment was held by an artist and archaeologist named Anish Shetty in Varanasi. Just as Junoon was about to discover the identity of the third and final fragment holder, Mohan, who was tied to a chair, managed to resist her mind control and pushed his chair off the balcony, falling from the building. Meanwhile, Shiva, who was with Isha, suddenly had a vision of what was happening to Mohan. Unfortunately, due to this vision, Shiva unconsciously ran out of the room and eventually lost consciousness. When Shiva woke up the next morning, he realized that the night before, he had left Isha without saying anything, which made him feel guilty. Because of this, he planned to meet Isha to apologize. With the help of the children at the orphanage, Shiva found out from her social media status that Isha was going to a festival. Shiva then quickly went to the location of the festival, where he found a newspaper reporting on Mohan's death the previous night. This made Shiva even more certain that his vision the night before was indeed what had happened to Mohan. When Shiva met Isha, he immediately told her about his vision, which matched the news report in the newspaper. After hearing Shiva's complete story, Isha helped him search for the name Anish on the internet, as he had also appeared in his vision and was suspected to be Junoon's next target. From the internet search, they learned that Anish was working on a project in Varanasi, so Shiva and Isha agreed to go to the city as soon as possible before the criminals could find Anish. Upon arriving in Varanasi, Shiva and Isha went to a candle festival organized by Anish, where they took a boat ride on the river. During this time, Shiva was startled when the flames from the surrounding candles moved to the palm of his hand, but strangely, he felt no heat from the fire. Seeing Isha panic, Shiva then explained his secret that he had been immune to fire since childhood. After that, Shiva and Isha went to the place where Anish was located until Shiva noticed Raftar on top of a building, wearing Mohan's Agastra bracelet, preparing to ambush Anish. Before this could happen, Shiva and Isha quickly split up tasks, where Isha intentionally distracted Raftar by pretending to be a tourist and asking him questions, while Shiva approached Anish to warn him that he was in danger and urged him to hide. When Shiva successfully secured Anish, Isha found herself in danger because Raftar had discovered her attempt to hinder his plan to attack Anish. She was terrified as Raftar pointed a gun at her, causing her to scream, which prompted Shiva to rush to her rescue. Shiva and Raftar then engaged in a fight in a pool, but unfortunately, the Brahmastra power used by Raftar overwhelmed Shiva for a while, until Raftar managed to retrieve his gun and attempted to shoot Isha. Luckily, Anish intervened to shield her, despite getting shot in the process. To fight Raftar, Anish then used the power of Astra, which could unleash the strength of a bull. After successfully attacking him, Anish quickly destroyed the floor so that the three of them could escape from Raftar and Junoon, who had just arrived at the place. Once the three were in the car, Anish, who was injured, said that they needed to meet the guru of Brahmins named Raghu in Himachal Pradesh, where the ashram or the gathering place of the Brahmins was located. After traveling a considerable distance, Shiva and the others stopped to rest for a while. During this time, Shiva began discussing the brahmastra fragment, so Anish showed the piece he had kept. Unexpectedly, upon seeing the fragment, Shiva's body appeared to be in pain, and he had a vision that the enemies were nearby. Shiva then looked around and realized that Junoon and Zor were watching them from a rice transport truck. Knowing this, Anish quickly gave the brahmastra fragment to Isha and Shiva and instructed them to take it to Himachal Pradesh immediately, while he planned to confront the enemies. Shortly after, Anish used his Astra power to stop the truck carrying Junoon and Zor and pushed it off a cliff. Unfortunately, Anish also had to sacrifice himself as he fell along with the truck. On the other hand, Shiva and Isha, who were in the car, were being chased by Raftar, who used his monkey powers to leap onto the car. Raftar then tried to pull Isha out and seize the brahmastra fragment. Fortunately, Shiva quickly kicked Raftar, sending him flying backward off the car. Shortly after, Raftar resumed the chase and used his dagger to try and stop the car that Shiva was driving. Despite this, Shiva continued to struggle to control the car until he told Isha to jump out because he was going to drive the car over a cliff. Fortunately, Shiva and Isha managed to escape safely, while Raftar ended up falling into the ravine with the car. Shiva and Isha then continued their journey until they arrived at the gate of the ashram. Since the gate was locked, Shiva climbed over it. At the same time, Raftar, who turned out to still be alive, suddenly appeared and was about to attack Isha, who was still outside the gate. In a panic, Shiva unconsciously managed to control the fire from Raghu's house to burn Raftar, who eventually fell to his death in the ravine. Unfortunately, after using his fire power, Shiva passed out. Raghu, who heard the commotion, came out to help Shiva and Isha. In his sleep, Shiva dreamed of seeing Junoon standing before the statue of Dev, proclaiming that she would gather all the brahmastra fragments and resurrect Dev. At that moment, Junoon also spoke about how Raftar was defeated by Shiva until the large statue suddenly lit up and created many small stones with fire powers. With these stones, Junoon could form a new army to seize the brahmastra fragments. When Shiva woke up, he was introduced to the members of Brahmins, who were Raghu's students, namely Rani, Ravina, Shur, and Tensing. Raghu then explained to Shiva about the Agni Astra, or the fire astra, that belonged to him but was still weak. After that, Raghu asked Shiva to become his student and join Brahmins. Initially refused, but after Raghu promised to reveal the origins of his parents, Shiva finally agreed to join Brahmins to learn about his parents. On the other hand, Isha was flown home by a senior Brahmins member using a helicopter to retrieve Shiva's belongings. Without wasting any time, Shiva and Raghu's other students began learning to control their respective powers. Some students appear to have already mastered their astras, while Shiva still didn't know how to activate his powers. That night, while sleeping, Shiva dreams again that Junoon was giving Dev's fire-empowered stones to the villagers, turning them all into her army. Additionally, he saw Isha in a panic as she was about to be captured by Zor, who had gained new powers after seizing the Nandi-Astra bracelet from Anish. Fortunately, some senior Brahmaj members who were with Isha tried to protect her from Zor's attack. Shiva then woke up immediately and contacted Isha to ensure her safety. At the same time, Raghu noticed small flames from the candles flying toward Shiva, realizing that his powers could be activated through Isha. Strangely, Shiva still couldn't unleash his fire powers, causing Raghu to question why he had not yet managed to use his abilities. Unexpectedly, Shiva confessed that he was still afraid of fire because he believed the fire that took his mother's life was his fault. Nevertheless, Shiva was determined to master his Agni-astra to protect the people he loved. A few days later, Shiva seemed to be getting better at controlling his Agni-astra, but since he couldn't yet create his own fire, Raghu gave him a lighter. During their conversation, a man suddenly appeared with the intention of attacking Shiva. Fortunately, Raghu managed to stop the attack by extinguishing the fire that Shiva had ignited. Raghu then examined the man, who was found to be wearing a stone necklace from Junoon. With this discovery, Raghu and his students began searching the surrounding village for other residents who might be wearing the same stone necklace. While on the road, Raghu showed Shiva the second brahmastra fragment belonging to Anish, which had previously been entrusted to Isha. He explained that since the other fragment was already in Junoon's hands, the Brahmaj needed to find the last fragment, whose location was still unknown. The scene then, shifting back to 30 years ago, where the Brahmaj headquarters was still located on a remote island, with one of its strongest members being Dev. With his power, Dev managed to control many astras, with the fire astra being the most powerful. Not satisfied with his power, Dev desired to control the brahmastra in the universe. To achieve this, Dev began defeating other Brahmaj members to take their astras, ultimately creating the first brahmastra in the world, which triggered a storm poised to destroy the world. Fortunately, Dev's wife, Amrita, managed to save the world by breaking the brahmastra into 3 parts and defeating Dev by extinguishing his fire with her water powers. After the chaos, both were reported not to have survived, leaving 2 brahmastra fragments on Amrita's ship, and the 3rd fragment was lost along with the island where the Brahmaj headquarters was located. Back in the present, Raghu explained to Shiva that during the battle, Amrita was known to be pregnant. Raghu admitted that the first time he saw Shiva, he could see Dev within him. Raghu also believed that Amrita survived the battle and gave birth to Shiva. In the middle of their conversation, Shiva and Raghu were startled by the appearance of fire and the discovery of a stone belonging to Junoon in one of the village houses. Not far from Shiva and the others, Junoon was seen having a meeting with her new army. Shiva then tried on the stone necklace, which allowed him to see the statue of Dev imbued with fire power. At the same time, Junoon realized that Shiva was wearing her stone necklace, allowing her to discover the Brahmaj's location. Fortunately, before Junoon could command her forces to attack the Brahmaj's headquarters, Raghu, who had located Junoon and her forces, tried to divert them by knocking down a large tree that fell on them. Meanwhile, Shiva, who had freed himself from the influence of the fire stone necklace, returned to the ashram, where he met Isha, who had brought back his conch shell. Realizing that the conch shell, a keepsake from his mother, was not an ordinary object, Shiva decided to test it by dropping his blood on it. Suddenly, the conch shell transformed into the final brahmastra fragment. This revelation made Shiva believe that Dev had also survived the battle in the past and was sealed somewhere. Shortly thereafter, Junoon and her forces arrived at the ashram and subdued Raghu to take the second brahmastra fragment. During the attack, Shiva, who tried to stop Junoon and her forces, was knocked unconscious by the enemy. When he regained consciousness, Shiva saw Raghu bound by Junoon's power, while Rani and the other Brahmaj students were taken hostage by her. Realizing the situation, Shiva and Isha had no choice but to hand over the 3rd fragment to Junoon to secure the release of the hostages. When Shiva, accompanied by Isha, met Junoon, he deliberately threw the final brahmastra fragment into the air to distract her. At the same time, Shiva began to unleash his Agni-astra to attack Junoon and her forces. To counter Shiva, Junoon used her water powers, causing rain to fall and extinguish his fire. Junoon then approached Shiva to invite him to join her, But Shiva refused and called upon the Brahmins to attack her and the enemy forces. In the midst of the battle, Isha noticed Junoon was preoccupied with the final brahmastra fragment, so Isha seized the opportunity to run and free Rani. Meanwhile, Shiva managed to snatch the third fragment from Junoon's grasp, leading the enemy forces to attack him. While Isha was hiding with Rani, she decided to lure Junoon to chase her to a cliff. Unexpectedly, Tensing suddenly appeared and handed the third fragment to Isha. Just before Junoon could attack Isha, Shiva stopped her with his Agastra. Unfortunately, this attack gave Shiva a vision of Dev that weakened his power. At that moment, Zor appeared and engaged in a duel with Shiva until he managed to create a fiery spear to defeat Zor. Meanwhile, Tensing used his power to push Junoon off the cliff, but unfortunately, Junoon, who survived the fall, stabbed Tensing to death and he fell into the ravine. After that, she quickly assembled the 3 brahmastra fragments and sacrificed her life to resurrect Dev. The activation of the brahmastra caused tremors on the earth and began to collapse the cliff where Shiva and the others were. At the end of the film, it shows Shiva who managed to reach Isha at the top of the cliff, then used his power to protect her from the devastating force of the brahmastra attacking the earth. With Isha's help, Shiva finally managed to control the brahmastra and save the earth from destruction. After this incident, Shiva was able to create his own fire. On the other side, Dev managed to free himself from his seal and re-emerged on an unknown island. Moral lesson from the story: never mix celestial weapons with your DJ playlist. You might end up with a dance floor full of sages trying to save the world. Also, remember that picking up girls in an elevator is fine. Just make sure you're not also picking up world-ending weapons.